Okay, so last class we gave an exercise where you were to create a method that calculates the square of a number. So in other words, if 2 is passed in, it would return 4. If 3 is passed in, it would return 9, and so on. So whatever number is passed in returns the square of that number. Let's start out by just creating the method, and then later we'll create an entire program to test the method. I'm going to put some comments here. So for example, pass in a 3, it returns 9. And it cannot use tau, exponent, or any other similar method that is built into Java. Can use multiplication. Okay, so we're going to create the method first. What are the two main parts to a method? The two main parts to any method? That is the correct words that we would start with. The two main parts are the header and the body. Remember that? Okay, so the header is how we declare the method. We specify the name of the method, the parameters it has, and so forth. And I did hear someone give me the correct words to start the header of the method, and that's going to be public. What's next? Static, correct? So this method will be publicly available. What does static mean again? Oh, okay, let's back up. What does public mean, first of all? That's correct. Public means that the entire program can see this method. An alternate value for that place in the header would be private, which would mean that only the class would have access to that method. Static means that the method is available to any object of the class, as opposed to being available to just one instance or one object of the class. Now, the next word that goes here is what? Well, the next word is what tells us what type of value this method will return. Right, so an int is a good option. I didn't specify the range of the values that we're going to work with, so int is a fair assumption. If we put void there, then what does that tell us about the method? It doesn't return a value, right? So so far the main method has always been void, but this method needs to return a value. That's part of the instructions, and we're going to go with int. Again, I didn't specify exactly which type of value it should return, so int is a fair assumption. Just notice I misspelled square. There we go. Okay, public static int. Now what? What's next? We need a name for the method, right? What do you want to call it? Square. That works. Then we have the parentheses. Inside the parentheses goes what? The parameters, correct. And this method needs to accept how many parameters? Right, we need 2 parameters. No, actually we don't. Sorry, we need 1 parameter. All we need is the one number that's being passed in, because this number simply calculates the square of that number. So we just need 1 parameter. And what type of parameter should it be? Int, correct. So again, I didn't specify, but that's a fair assumption. We need a name for this variable. What do you want to call it? Num, that works. Now there's a couple ways we could go about this. One way would be to create a variable and store the answer in that variable, right? And then we would return that answer. Okay, that's one general approach. So what type of variable should we use? Int, that works. And what do you want to call it? Sum? I wouldn't use sum because we're not calculating a sum. I mean, functionally, right, the name of the variable doesn't matter, but we want to pick a name that is meaningful, that's representative of what it's actually storing. So what would you like to call it? Result? That works. So we'll call it result. And what is result going to be equal to? That's correct. Number times itself. And we would return what? Return result. That looks correct to me. We can't compile yet because we don't have a main, but we can save. Now, when we save, we have to choose the name of the class. So what do you want to call this class? All right, and so I heard number squared, that works. And we're going to use the capitalization convention for classes, which is to capitalize the first letter of each word, no spaces, no underscores. So number squared dot Java. Okay, so that's our method. Now we need to create a class and we need to create a main method in order to actually test and use this method. I am skipping comments in interest of time, but there should be some comments in this method that describe what the method does and what the variables are for. Okay, so let's create the class. I'll give you the first word. Class, that's correct. And we need to call it what we named the file, number squared. Capitalization has to match. Here's the start of our class. I'm going to end the class there. Then we need our main. What is our favorite phrase here for the main? That's correct. Public static void main string with the square brackets arg. Okay, so there's our main. This is our method that calculates the square. Just going to tab in the spaces here to line it up. Now we need to call the method to test it. And we should display the results probably so we know if it's working correctly or not. There's a couple ways we could go about that as well. I'm going to use a similar approach in that I'm going to have a local variable here that's going to store the answer, and then we'll display the value of that local variable. Again, that's just one approach. In a minute, I'll show you a different approach. So what would you like to call our local variable? It's going to store the answer. I wouldn't call it total. Total is not accurate as to what we're actually calculating here. We could call it num. That's might be slightly confusing because we have another variable named num inside of the method square. Now, granted, they're both local variables, so we could do that. Okay, they would not interfere with each other, but from a programmer's point of view, that might be a little confusing. I'm having trouble hearing you. Multiplication. It's a little generic. Let's see. We can't call it square because that's the name of the method. How about this result? Okay, so that kind of signifies that the local variable this result and this local variable results have something in common. Okay, but they're not the same variable. So now we need to assign a value to this result by calling the method. How do we do that? Square, parentheses. We need to put a number here. Okay, so I'm just going to pick a number. And then we need to display it. So it's system.out.println line, parentheses, this result is the name of our local variable. So let me compile it, make sure I typed everything correctly. There's no syntax errors. Okay, there's no syntax errors. It compiled. Now let's try to run it. It looks like it worked correctly. So we passed in a 3, we got back 9. Just to be sure, we want to test a couple of other values. Let's try a 2. Now you could have gotten this number from the user. I didn't specify where the number comes from, but it does need to be flexible like this in that we can test it with any number we want somehow. Looks like it's working. Okay, we tried a few different values, and the answer was correct. Something I want to point out as we delve deeper into methods and local variables is that we could have named the local variable here the same thing as the local variable here. Okay, because they're both local variables, they're only accessible within the method that they're declared. So this is another option. Okay, we could have named them the same thing. Oh, we have to make sure that when we use the variable, we are consistent. Okay, so we have a local variable result in main. We have another local variable result in square. We do want them to store the same thing, okay? And we achieve that with this line here. Okay, so this local variable result takes on the value of whatever is returned by the method square. We could also do this without variables, which maybe saves a little bit of memory, a little bit of processing time. The code might be a little bit more difficult to read, but let's take a look at how we could have done that. So I'm going to comment out our local variable result within square. I'll comment out this. Now, obviously, we cannot return result. It no longer exists. We commented out those lines that use it. But what we could do is we could simply return num times num. And that will result in an int. So we can return that as an acceptable value in this method because it's expecting an int to be returned. So this would work. Okay, and just to take the point even further, I could delete these entirely. And we have a very simple method, one line. And we could also reduce the main method. Okay, we don't actually need this variable for what we're doing here. And instead of printing result, which no longer exists, we could print the result of whatever this square method returns. Okay, since our method square returns an int, we know that the print line method can handle an int and knows what to do with it. It'll simply display it to the screen. This is actually legal. Okay, so this solution is possibly a little more difficult to read, but we've reduced the number of steps, the number of calculations. Okay, so we're not declaring our local variables result. We've eliminated 2 of those, and we're not assigning those local variables to a value. We've eliminated 2 of those. So while this savings time may seem negligible on a program this small, another way to look at it is that we basically eliminated 2/3 of the steps in terms of the calculations and declarations. So this would run faster and use less resources. Granted, it's slightly more difficult to read, so there's a trade-off there. There's no hard and fast rule as to which way to go. Okay, it depends on the needs of the program, depends on the problem you're trying to solve. But I just want to show you some of the options that are out there so that you can think about how to create your program efficiently, but still make it easy to read. Any questions on the solution here? No? All right. Going to end this Google Hangouts session.